Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by Time Travel.
Oh, we have a recurring sponsor.
What? When was the first time?
I think she is referring to an event that hasn't occurred yet.
So, paradox?
More of an anomaly.
Whatever.
Police headquarters, Inspector Harris speaking.
Inspector Harris, this is Peter Arnold.
Yeah, what can I do for you?
Inspector Harris, I think I'm going to be murdered.
What?
Just a minute ago, I received an anonymous letter threatening my life.
Have you any idea who it's from?
No.
Where are you now?
I'm at my office in the Acme building, 10th floor.
I'll be right over. Stay right where you are.
Oh, yes, Inspector. Only hurry.
Here's the place, Chief. The Acme building.
Okay.
Hope we're not too late.
Well, if we hurry, we can...
What's the matter, Chief?
Yeah. On the street, little pieces of glass.
Glass? Where'd that come from?
I don't know.
Hey, Chief.
What?
Look up there. See that broken window?
That's Arnold's office. Come on, Stacy. Something's wrong up there. What's happened up here?
Who are you?
We're the police. I'm Inspector Harris, and this is my assistant, Joe Stacy.
Oh, am I glad you've come. I'm Lois Cranston, Mr. Arnold's secretary.
Yeah?
Something terrible's happened. Mr. Arnold locked himself in this office.
Yes?
And just a minute ago, I heard a shot and then glass breaking.
Come on, Stacy. Help me break down this door.
Okay.
All right. Ready? 1, 2, 3. There.
Holy Moses. Look, Chief.
Is anything wrong? And Mr. Arnold.
Will you look at that? A bullet hole right through his head.
And the window's broken. The murderer must have been standing on the roof of that building across the alleyway and fired through this window.
I'm afraid you're wrong.
What do you mean?
I mean that I'm arresting you, Miss Cranston, for the murder of Peter Arnold.
How does the inspector know that Miss Cranston murdered Peter Arnold? We'll give you the solution in just a moment. But first...
The classic locked door murder mystery.
I fail to see how any of these, mysteries can be called classics.
He's right, Ron. They are quite predictable.
But the door was locked from the inside.
Who said that?
I assumed.
Need I remind you that?
Don't say it. This is a family show.
Fine, but he is a donkey buttock.
I'm so confused.
My point exactly.
And now, back to our story.
Mr. Arnold was shot from outside. The broken glass proves it.
Oh, that's what you've tried to make us believe. No, Miss Cranston. You shot Peter Arnold from this very room, broke the window to make it look like the shooting was done from outside, and then went out and locked the door. It would have been a perfect murder, except for one thing.
What was that?
The broken window. You see, we found the fragments of glass on the street.
Well?
If the bullet had been fired from the outside, the fragments of glass would have gone in the direction of fire. In other words, the glass would have landed inside the room, not on the street. No, Miss Cranston, you murdered Peter Arnold. I don't know why you did it, but we'll soon get the story out of you at headquarters.
Well, you guys ruined my locked door mystery with all your babbling.
We did nothing. I think the storytellers did that all by themselves.
Whatever. I had it all figured out. I looked at the facts and came up with a different solution.
Wrong. I think you would study for a blood test and still fail.
Yeah, but what am I?
Also, you need to work on your comebacks.
Now, BG, remember he is the host.
He should work on that as well.
I hate you guys.
Is that you say?
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. On the show today, we have a special story from the pages of the 1950s pulp mags. Have you ever wondered what time travel could be like? Do you have visions of visiting the past to see events play out in real time? But what if you had to go to the past and attempt to change a mistake to save the future? That is the dilemma that Mac Albin is faced with in the story of All the Possible Worlds, written by William Tenn. This is a thought-provoking story that really had me thinking, what if? But before we travel through time, we're going to take a look at the Audible podcast titled The Safe Man. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. One of the questions I get asked most often is, why do I like old-time radio so much? It's simple. You don't need your eyes, and all the pictures are in your head. That's also why I like audiobooks. To me, there's nothing like a refreshing drink, a wonderful snack, and a story that I can close my eyes to and enjoy the show. This time, we're going to take a look at the Audible Original Podcast called The Safe Man. It comes from New York Times bestselling author Michael Connelly and is a riveting detective story, nail-biting heist thriller, and even a supernatural mystery. Here is a clip from the book.
Who's there? Jesus. Who's down there? I have a gun. Jesus. Where are you? Show yourself. Come out.
Audible Originals presents The Safe Man, based on the short story by Michael Connelly, written by Michael Connelly and Terrell Lee Langford, directed by Titus Welliver and Mark Henry Phillips, starring Jack Quaid and Titus Welliver.
Okay, this is TPD Detective Angela Rodriguez, serial number 61877. Conducting an interview with Paul Robinette at 11:10 a.m. the morning of June 18th, 2022.
Mr. Robinette, why don't we start with when you first realized your daughter was not in the house?
Last night, I'd been working in my office.
You are a writer, sir?
Yes, I write novels, horror, science fiction, speculative fiction. Anyway, I was working on a novel last night in my office. I left the office to say goodnight to her, and she was in her room. I tried calling her, she didn't answer. She turned off location sharing. It's not like her.
I understand you just moved here from Colorado.
That has nothing to do with this.
How would you describe your relationship with your ex-wife?
That's not what this is about. Lacey has come to terms with our split and everything is amicable. She lives with her mom, but I get her for the summer.
And when did this visit start?
A week ago.
Mr. Robinette, your daughter is 14, right?
14 going on 30. She's an old soul.
Well, see, that's what I'm getting at. 14 is an age where young people sometimes just need to get away. They wander off.
Let me stop you right there. She didn't wander off. Somebody took her. Somebody has her. And I don't know what I need to do to get you to take this seriously and get out there and start looking for her.
We are looking for her. We are just trying to fully understand the situation. Have you checked with your ex-wife to see if Lacey has made any contact with her?
I have not.
I think she needs to be contacted. We can handle that.
Listen to me. My daughter is not in Colorado. She has no means of getting there. Why are you insisting on talking to my ex when the person you should be talking to is the man who was in our house yesterday?
We are in the process of locating Mr. Holloway and bringing him in for an interview. You mentioned Mr. Holloway to the patrol officers who first responded to your call. Why was that?
They asked me who had been in the house recently. I told them I had a locksmith come in yesterday, and that was Holloway.
Why did you need a locksmith?
I found a floor safe in the house after I bought it. It was under a rug that came with the house. It was locked, so I called Holloway to come open it.
And how did you find him?
Googled. He's called the Safe Man.
When you Googled him, did you see anything about his father?
His father? No. What's his father have to do with this?
As far as I know, nothing.
He mentioned him at one point.
How so?
He had like a homemade gadget, a wire hanger actually. He used it somehow to open the safe. He said his father invented it or something.
How long was Brian Holloway in your house?
A few hours.
Did your daughter meet him or talk to him?
I don't think so, but I was in my office most of the time trying to get away from the horrible sound of the drill.
When was the last time you actually saw your daughter yesterday, Mr. Robinette?
It was after the safe man left. I paid him when he left, and then I saw Lacey in the kitchen. She was making hot chocolate.
Did she say anything to you?
She just said she was cold.
Did she mention the safe man?
No.
And as far as you know, Holloway did not come back to the house after he was finished with his work and you paid him?
No.
Then is there any other reason you think we should talk to him?
Yeah. There was all this drilling going on and then silence, so I thought maybe he had gotten the safe open, you know? So I went down to the library, but the safe wasn't open, and I found him looking through the book collection, the books that were part of the estate sale when I bought the house. I paid him to drill the safe, not paw through my property.
Okay, Mr. Robinette. You've given us some good information to follow up on. We are doing everything we can to locate your daughter, and I am sure we will be returning her.
Don't give me that line of This is the kind of stuff I write about. It never ends well.
What you need to do is go home and be there in case she returns. Stay by your phone, and we will call you as soon as we have any pertinent information on her whereabouts. I'm turning off the record.
Brian Holloway was hired by famous horror author Paul Rubinette to crack an antique safe in his home. He had no idea of what he was about to encounter. Opening that safe door unleashed something sinister, something that continues to haunt him. But what exactly? And can whatever slipped through that threshold be stopped? That is what this 8-episode podcast is going to tell you. Set against the eerie tropics of Florida, The Safe Man reimagines Connelly's 2012 short story as a pulse-pounding audio drama. This Connelly masterpiece delivers his signature flavor of suspense and is produced with brilliant sound design for an unforgettable experience. It is a live-acting read, which means it's full of wonderful characters played by amazing actors. The acting is spot on, and the story is something you can't believe would ever happen, but are left wondering, what if it did? This story is a great edge-of-your-seat thriller filled with plot twists, intrigue, and is nearly impossible to stop listening to. This could have easily been right out of the caliber of Stephen King, which is quite the compliment, and I highly recommend it. Now, normally this is where I tell you that you can get this one for free. But in this case, this is one of Audible's many plus listens, which means that even if you get a different audiobook, you can still listen to this one for free as well. Here is what Audible has set up for us. They are offering you a free audiobook in 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out the service. You can stream or download thousands of included audiobooks, podcasts, and Audible Originals in the Plus catalog. There is so much to do, you will never run out of material. So, to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. You'll be glad you did. Thank you, Audible. Our featured story is one of the most probable outcomes on time travel I've ever heard. I want to say so much about this one, but it'll have to wait until after you've heard the story. Anything I would say would just spoil the ending. I've always told people that I hate stories about traveling through time, but yet I seem to play a lot of them on this show. Why is that? The only answer I can give is that authors from the 50s and 60s were always looking to the future for their inspiration. What better way to do that than by going there? Hence, they wrote a lot about the past going to the future or the present going to the past. Time travel provides writers with mounds of possibilities to contrast with their own daily grind. In Mark Twain's early take on the genre, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, a man from the 1880s tries to introduce his era to medieval England. Another example comes from H.G. Wells and The Time Machine, where the wars of the present have a lasting impact on the future of mankind. So, what does it all mean? Just this. The term time travel includes so many varieties as to render it almost meaningless. The very concept of time is one of the strangest and most mind-boggling because time relates to all things. Our story today comes from the pulp fiction magazine Galaxy, September of 1956. It is titled Of All Possible Worlds and was written by William Tenn. It is read for us by Phil Shenevert, and it is my hope that you enjoy it.
It was a good job, and Max Albin knew whom he had to thank for it. His great-grandfather. Good old Giovanni Albani, he muttered as he hurried into the laboratory, slightly ahead of the escorting technicians, all of them, despite the excitement of the moment, remembering to bob their heads deferentially at the half-dozen full-fleshed and hard-faced men lolling on the couches that had been set up around the time machine. He shrugged rapidly out of his rags, as he had been instructed in the anteroom, and stepped into the housing of the enormous mechanism. This was the first time he had seen it since he had been taught how to operate it on a dummy model, and now he stared at the great transparent coils and the susurrating energy bubble with much respect. This machine, the pride and the hope of 2089, was something almost outside his powers of comprehension. But Max Albin knew how to run it, and he knew roughly what it was supposed to accomplish. He knew also that this was the first backward journey of any great duration, and, being scientifically unpredictable, might well be the death of him. Good old Giovanni Albani, he muttered again affectionately. If his great-grandfather had not volunteered for the earliest time travel experiments way back in the 1970s, back even before the Blight, it would never have been discovered that he and his seed possessed a great deal of immunity to extratemporal blackout. And, if that had not been discovered, the ruling powers of Earth, more than a century later, would never have plucked Max Albin out of an obscure civil service job as a relief guard at the North American Chicken Reservation to his present heroic and remunerative eminence. He would still be patrolling the barbed wire that surrounded the 3 white leghorn hens and 2 roosters, about 1/6 of the known livestock wealth of the Western Hemisphere, thoroughly content with the half pail of dried apricots he received each and every payday. No, if his great-grandfather had not demonstrated long ago his unique capacity for remaining conscious during time travel, Max Albin would not now be shifting from foot to foot in a physics laboratory, facing the black market kings of the world and awaiting their final instructions with an uncertain and submissive grin. Men like O'Hara, who controlled mushrooms, Levney, the blackberry tycoon, Sargasso, the packaged worm monopolist, would black marketeers of their tremendous stature so much as waste a glance on someone like Albin ordinarily, let alone confer a lifetime pension on his wife and 5 children of a full spoonful each of non-synthetic sugar a day? Even if he didn't come back, his family was provided for like almost no other family on earth. This was a damn good job, and he was lucky. Albin noticed that Abba Sadha had risen from the straight chair at the far side of the room and was approaching him with a sealed metal cylinder in one hand. "We've decided to add a further precaution at the last moment," the old man said. "That is, the scientists have suggested it, and I have given my approval." The last remark was added with a slight questioning note, as the Secretary-General of the United Nations looked back rapidly at the black market princes on the couches behind him. Since they stared back stonily but offered no objection, he coughed in relief and returned to Albin. "I am sure, young man, that I don't have to go into the details of your instructions once more. You enter the time machine and go back the duration for which it has been preset, 113 years, to the moment after the guided missile of 1976 was launched. It is 1976, isn't it?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "Yes, sir," one of the technicians standing by the time machine said respectfully. "The experiment with an atomic warhead-guided missile that resulted in the Blight was conducted on this site on April 18, 1976. He glanced proudly at the unemotional men on the couches, very much like a small boy after completing a recitation before visiting dignitaries from the Board of Education. "Just so," Abd Sadha nodded. "April 18, 1976, and on this site. You see, young man, you will materialize at the very moment and on the very spot where the remote control station handling the missile was, handling the missile. You will be in a superb position to deflect the missile in its downward course and alter human history for the better. Very much for the better, yes." He paused, having evidently stumbled out of his thought sequence. "And he pulls the red switch toward him," Gomez, the dandelion root magnate, reminded him sharply, impatiently. "Ah, yes, the red switch. He pulls the little red switch toward him. Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Thank you very much, sir. He pulls the little red switch on the green instrument panel toward him, thus preventing the error that caused the missile to explode in the Brazilian jungle and causing it instead to explode somewhere in the mid-Pacific, as originally planned." The Secretary-General of the United Nations beamed, thus preventing the Blight, making it non-existent, as it were, producing a present-day world in which the Blight never occurred. "That is correct, is it not, gentlemen?" he asked, turning anxiously again. None of the half-dozen men on couches deigned to answer him, and Albin kept his eyes deferentially in their direction, too, as he had throughout this period of last-minute instruction. He knew who ruled his world, These stolid, well-fed men in clean garments with a minimum of patches, and where patches occurred at least they were the color of the surrounding cloth. Sadha might be Secretary General of the United Nations, but that was still a civil service job, only a few social notches higher than a chicken guard. His clothes were fully as ragged, fully as multicolored as those that Albin had stepped out of, and the gnawing in his stomach was no doubt almost as great. "You understand, do you not, young man, that if anything goes wrong," Abd Sadha asked, his head nodding tremulously and anticipating the answer, "if anything unexpected, unprepared for occurs, you are not to continue with the experiment but return immediately?" "He understands everything he has to understand," Gomez told him. "Let's get this thing moving." The old man smiled again. "Yes, of course, Mr. Gomez." He came up to where Albin stood in the entrance of the time machine and handed the sealed metal cylinder to him. "This is the precaution the scientists have added. When you arrive at your destination, just before materializing, you will release it into the surrounding temporal medium. Our purpose here, as you no doubt—" Levny sat up on his couch and snapped his fingers peremptorily. "I just heard Gomez tell you to get this thing moving, Sadha. And it isn't moving. We're busy men. We wasted enough time." "I was just trying to explain a crucial final fact," the Secretary General apologized. "A fact which may be highly—" "You've explained enough facts." Levny turned to the man inside the time machine. "Hey, fella, you. Move." Mac Albin gulped and nodded violently. He darted to the rear of the machine and turned the dial which activated it. Flick. It was a good job, and Mac Albin knew whom he had to thank for it, his great-grandfather. "Good old Giovanni Albini," he laughed as he looked at the morose faces of his two colleagues. Bob Skiat and Hugo Honeck had done as much as he to build the tiny time machine in the secret lab under the helicopter garage, and they were fully as eager to go, but, unfortunately for them, they were not descended from the right ancestor. Leisurely, he unzipped the richly embroidered garment that, as the father of two children, he was privileged to wear, and wriggled into the housing of the complex little mechanism. This was hardly the first time he had seen it, since he'd been helping to build the device from the moment Honeck had nodded and risen from the drafting board, and now he barely wasted a glance on the thumb-sized translucent coils growing out of the almost microscopic energy bubbles which powered them. This machine was the last hope of 2089, even if the world of 2089 as a whole did not know of its existence and would try to prevent its being put into operation. But it meant a lot more to Mac Albin than merely saving a world. It meant an adventurous mission with the risk of death. "Good old Giovanni Albini," he laughed happily. If his great-grandfather had not volunteered for the earliest time travel experiments way back in the 1970s, even before the epidemic, it would never have been discovered that he and his seed possessed a great deal of immunity to extratemporal blackout. And if that had not been discovered, the Albins would not have become physicists on the passage of the United Nations law that everyone on Earth, absolutely without exception, had to choose a branch of research science in which to specialize. In the flabby, careful, life-guarding world the Earth had become, Mac Albin would never have been reluctantly selected by his two co-workers as the one to carry the forbidden banner of dangerous experiment. No, if his great-grandfather had not demonstrated long ago his unique capacity for remaining conscious during time travel, Mac Albin would probably be a biologist today, like almost everyone else on Earth, laboriously working out dreary gene problems instead of embarking on the greatest adventure man had known to date. Even if he didn't come back, He had at last found a socially useful escape from genetic responsibility to humanity in general, and his own family in particular. This was a damn good job, and he was lucky. "Wait a minute, Mac," Skiat said, and crossed to the other side of the narrow laboratory. Albin and Hunnick watched him stuff several sheets of paper into a small metal box which he closed without locking. "You will take care of yourself, won't you, Mac?" Hugo Hunnick pleaded. "Any time you feel like taking an unnecessary risk, remember that Bob and I will have to stand trial if you don't come back. We might be sentenced to complete loss of professional status and spend the rest of our lives supervising robot factories." "Oh, it won't be that bad," Albin reassured him absent-mindedly from where he lay contorted inside the time machine. He watched Skiat coming toward him with the box. Honeck shrugged his shoulders. "It might be a lot worse than even that, and you know it. The disappearance of a two-time father is going to leave an awful big vacancy in the world. One-timers like Bob and me are all over the place. If either of us dropped out of sight, it wouldn't cause nearly as much uproar." "But Bob and you both tried to operate the machine," Albin reminded him, "and you blacked out after a 15-second temporal displacement. So I'm the only chance, the only way to stop the human race from dwindling and dwindling till it hits absolute zero, like that fat old Security Council seems willing for it to do." "Take it easy, Mac," Bob Skiat said as he handed the metal box to Albin. "The Security Council is just trying to solve the problem in their way, the conservative way. A worldwide concentration on genetics research coupled with the maximum preservation of existing human lives, especially those that have a high reproductive potential. We three disagree with them. We've been skulking down here nights to solve it our way. And ours is a radical approach and plenty risky. That's the reason for the metal box, trying to cover one more explosive possibility." Albin turned it around curiously. "How?" "I sat up all night writing the manuscript that's inside it. Look, Mac, when you go back to the guided missile experiment of 1976 and push that red switch away from you, a lot of other things are going to happen than just deflecting the missile so that it will explode in the Brazilian jungle instead of the Pacific Ocean." "Sure, I know. If it explodes in the jungle, the epidemic doesn't occur. No Shapiro's mumps." Skiat jiggled his pudgy little face impatiently. "That's not what I mean. The epidemic doesn't occur, but something else does. A new world, a different 2089, an alternate time sequence. It'll be a world in which humanity has a better chance to survive, but it'll be one with problems of its own. Maybe tough problems. Maybe the problems will be tough enough so that they'll get the same idea we did and try to go back to the same point in time to change them." Albin laughed. "That's just looking for trouble." "Maybe it is, but that's my job. Hugo's the designer of the time machine and you're the operator, but I'm the theoretical man in this research team. It's my job to look for trouble. So, just in case, I wrote a brief history of the world from the time the missile exploded in the Pacific. It tells why ours is the worst possible of futures. It's in that box." "What do I do with it? Hand it to the guy from the alternate 2089? The small, fat man exasperatedly hit the side of the time machine with a well-cushioned palm. "You know better. There won't be any alternate 2089 until you push that red switch on the green instrument panel. The moment you do, our world, with all its slow slide to extinction, goes out, and its alternate goes on, just like two electric light bulbs on a push-pull circuit. We, and every single one of our artifacts, including the time machine, disappear. The problem is how to keep that manuscript from disappearing. Well, all you do, if I have this figured right, is shove the metal box containing the manuscript out into the surrounding temporal medium a moment before you materialize to do your job. That temporal medium in which you'll be traveling is something that exists independent of and autonomous to all possible futures. It's my hunch that something that's immersed in it will not be altered by a new time sequence. "Remind him to be careful, Bob," Honeck rumbled. "He thinks he's Captain Blood, and this is his big chance to run away to sea and become a swashbuckling pirate." Albin grimaced in annoyance. "I am excited by doing something besides sitting in a safe little corner working out safe little abstractions for the first time in my life. But I know that this is a first experiment. Honestly, Hugo, I really have enough intelligence to recognize that simple fact. I know that if anything unexpected pops up, anything we didn't foresee, I'm supposed to come scuttling back and ask for advice." "I hope you do," Bob Skiat sighed. "I hope you do know that. A 20th century poet once wrote something to the effect that the world will end not with a bang, but a whimper. Well, our world is ending with a whimper. Try to see that it doesn't end with a bang either." "That I'll promise you," Albin said a trifle disgustedly. "It'll end with neither a bang nor a whimper. So long, Hugo. So long, Bob." He twisted around, reaching overhead for the lever which activated the forces that drove the time machine. Flick. It was strange, Max Albin reflected, that this time travel business, which knocked unconscious everyone who tried it, only made him feel slightly dizzy. That was because he was descended from Giovanni Albini, he had been told. There must be some complicated scientific explanation for it, he decided, and that would make it none of his business. Better forget about it. All around the time machine there was a heavy gray murk in which objects were hinted at rather than stated definitely. It reminded him of patrolling his beat at the North American chicken reservation in a thick fog. According to his gauges, he was now in 1976. He cut speed until he hit the last day of April, then cut speed again, drifting slowly backward to the 18th, the day of the infamous guided missile experiment. Carefully, like a man handling a strange bomb made on a strange planet, he watched the center gauge until the needle came to rest against the thin-etched line that indicated the exact crucial moment. Then he pulled the brake and stopped the machine dead. All he had to do now was materialize in the right spot, flash out and pull the red switch toward him, then his well-paid assignment would be done. But he stopped and scratched his dirt-matted hair. Wasn't there something he was supposed to do a second before materialization? Yes, that useless old windbag Sadha had given him a last instruction. He picked up the sealed metal cylinder, walked to the entrance of the time machine, and tossed it into the gray murk. A solid object floating near the entrance caught his eye. He put his arm out. Whew, it was cold, and pulled it inside. A small metal box. Funny. What was it doing out there? Curiously, he opened it, hoping to find something valuable. Nothing but a few sheets of paper, Albin noticed disappointedly. He began to read them slowly, very slowly, for the manuscript was full of a lot of long and complicated words, like a letter from one bookworm scientist to another. The problem all began with the guided missile experiment of 1976, he read. There had been a number of such experiments, but it was the one of 1976 that finally did the damage the biologists had been warning about. The missile with its deadly warhead exploded in the Pacific Ocean as planned. The physicists and the military men went home to study their notes, and the world shivered once more over the approaching war and tried to forget about it. But there was fallout, a radioactive rain several hundred miles to the north, and a small fishing fleet got thoroughly soaked by it. Fortunately, the radioactivity in the rain was sufficiently low to do little obvious physical damage. All it did was cause a mutation in the mumps virus that several of the men in the fleet were incubating at the time, having caught it from the children of the fishing town, among whom a minor epidemic was raging. The fleet returned to its hometown, which promptly came down with the new kind of mumps. Dr. Llewellyn Shapiro, the only physician in town, was the first man to note that, while the symptoms of this disease were substantially milder than those of its unmutated parent, practically no one was immune to it, and its effects on human reproductivity were truly terrible. Most people were completely sterilized by it. The rest were rendered much less capable of fathering or bearing offspring. Shapiro's mumps spread over the entire planet in the next few decades. It leaped across every quarantine erected. For a long time it successfully defied all the vaccines and serums attempted against it. Then, when a vaccine was finally perfected, humanity discovered to its dismay that its generative powers had been permanently and fundamentally impaired. Something had happened to the germ plasm. A large percentage of individuals were born sterile, and of those who were not, one child was usually the most that could be expected, a 2-child parent being quite rare, and a 3-child parent almost unknown. Strict eugenic control was instituted by the Security Council of the United Nations so that fertile men and women would not be wasted upon non-fertile mates. Fertility was the most important avenue to social status, and right after it came successful genetic research. Genetic research had the very best minds prodded into it. The lesser ones went into the other sciences. Everyone on Earth was engaged in some form of scientific research to some extent. Since the population was now so limited in proportion to the great resources available, all physical labor had long been done by robots. The government saw to it that everybody had an ample supply of goods, and in return asked only that they experiment without any risk to their own lives. Every human being was now a much prized, highly guarded rarity. There were less than 100,000 of them, well below the danger point it had been estimated, where species might be wiped out by a new calamity. Not that another calamity would be needed. Since the end of the epidemic, the birth rate had been moving further and further behind the death rate. In another century, that was why a desperate and secret attempt to alter the past was being made. This kind of world was evidently impossible. Mac Albin finished the manuscript and sighed. What a wonderful world! What a comfortable place to live! He walked to the rear dials and began the process of materializing at the crucial moment of April 18, 1976. Flick. It was odd, Mac Albin reflected, that these temporal journeys, which induced coma in everyone who tried it, only made him feel slightly dizzy. That was because he was descended from Giovanni Albini, he knew. Maybe there was some genetic relationship with his above-average fertility. Might be a good idea to mention the idea to a biologist or two when he returned, if he returned. All around the time machine there was a soupy gray murk in which objects were hinted at rather than stated definitely. It reminded him of the problems of landing a helicopter in a thick fog when the robot butler had not been told to turn on the ground lights. According to the insulated register, he was now in 1976. He lowered speed until he registered April, then maneuvered slowly backward through time to the 18th, the day of the infamous guided missile experiment. Carefully, like an obstetrician supervising surgical robots at an unusually difficult birth, he watched the register until it rolled to rest against the notch that indicated the exact crucial moment. Then he pushed a button and froze the machine where it was. All he had to do now was materialize in the right spot, flash out, and push the red switch from him. Then his exciting adventure would be over. But He paused and tapped at his sleek chin. He was supposed to do something a second before materialization. Yes, that nervous theoretician Bob Skiat had given him a last suggestion. He picked up the small metal box, twisted around to face the opening of the time machine, and dropped it into the gray murk. A solid object floating near the opening attracted his attention. He shot his arm out. It was cold as they had figured, and pulled the object inside. A sealed metal cylinder. Strange. What was it doing out there? Anxiously he opened it, not daring to believe he'd find a document inside. Yes, that was exactly what it was, he saw excitedly. He began to read it rapidly, very rapidly, as if it were a newly published paper on neutrinos. Besides, the manuscript was written with almost painful simplicity, like a textbook composed by a stuffy pedagogue for the use of morons. The problem all began with the guided missile experiment of 1976, he read. There had been a number of such experiments, but it was the one of 1976 that finally did the damage the biologist had been warning about. The missile, with its deadly warhead, exploded in the Brazilian jungle through some absolutely unforgivable error in the remote control station. The officer in charge of the station was reprimanded and the men under him court-martialed, and the Brazilian government was paid a handsome compensation for the damage. But there had been more damage than anyone knew at the time. A plant virus, similar to the tobacco mosaic, had mutated under the impact of radioactivity. 5 years later, it burst out of the jungle and completely wiped out every last rice plant on Earth. Japan and a large part of Asia became semi-deserts inhabited by a few struggling nomads. Then the virus adjusted to wheat and corn, and famine howled in every street of the planet. All attempts by botanists to control the blight failed because of the swiftness of its onslaught. And after it had fed, it hit again at a new plant, and another, and another. Most of the world's non-human mammals had been slaughtered for food long before they could starve to death. Many insects, too, before they became extinct at the loss of their edible plants, served to assuage hunger to some small extent. But the nutritive potential of Earth was steadily diminishing in a horrifying geometric progression. Recently, it had been observed plankton, the tiny organism on which most of the sea's ecology was based, had started to disappear, and with its diminution, dead fish had begun to pile up on the beaches. Mankind had lunged out desperately in all directions in an effort to survive, but nothing had worked for any length of time. Even the other planets of the solar system, which had been reached and explored at a tremendous cost in remaining resources, had yielded no edible vegetation. Synthetics had failed to fill the prodigious gap. In the midst of the sharply increasing hunger, social controls had pretty much dissolved. Pathetic attempts at rationing still continued, but black markets became the only markets, and black marketeers the barons of life. Starvation took the hindmost, and only the most agile economically lived in comparative comfort. Law and order were had only by those who could afford to pay for them, and children of impoverished families were sold on the open market for a bit of food. But the blight was still adjusting to new plants, and the food supply kept shrinking. In another century, that was why the planet's powerful individuals had been persuaded to pool their wealth in a desperate attempt to alter the past. This kind of world was manifestly impossible. Mac Albin finished the document and sighed. What a magnificent world! What an exciting place to live! He dropped his hand on the side levers and began the process of materializing at the crucial moment of April 18, 1976. Flick. As the equipment of the remote control station began to take on a blurred reality all around him, Max Albin felt a bit of fear at what he was doing. The technicians, he remembered, the Secretary General, even the black market kings, had all warned him not to go ahead with his instructions if anything unusual turned up. That was an awful lot of power to disobey. He knew he should return with this new information and let better minds work on it. They, with their easy lives, what did they know what existence had been like for such as he? Hunger, always hunger, scrabbling, servility, and more hunger. Every time things got really tight, you and your wife looked sideways at your kids and wondered which of them would bring the best price. Buying security for them as he was now, at the risk of his life. But in this other world, this other 2089, there was a state that took care of you and that treasured your children. A man like himself, with 5 children. Why, he'd be a big man, maybe the biggest man on Earth. And he'd have robots to work for him and lots of food. Above all, lots and lots of food. He'd even be a scientist. Everyone was a scientist there, weren't they? And he'd have a big laboratory all to himself. This other world had its troubles, but it was a lot nicer place than where he'd come from. He couldn't return. He'd go through with it. The fear left him, and for the first time in his life, Max Albin felt the sensation of power. He materialized the time machine around the green instrument panel, sweating a bit at the sight of the room full of military figures, despite the technician's reassurances that all this would be happening too fast to be visible. He saw the single red switch pointing upward on the instrument panel, the switch that controlled the course of the missile. Now to make a halfway decent world. Max Albin pulled the little red switch toward him. Flick. As the equipment of the remote control station began to oscillate into reality all around him, Max Albin felt a bit of shame at what he was doing. He'd promised Bob and Hugo to drop the experiment at any stage if a new factor showed up. He knew he should go back with this new information and have all 3 of them kick it around. But what would they be able to tell him, they with their blissful adjustment to their thoroughly blueprinted lives? They at least had been ordered to marry women they could live with. He'd drawn a female with whom he was completely incompatible in any but a genetic sense. Genetics! He was tired of genetics and the sanctity of human life. Tired to the tip of his uncalloused fingers. Tired to the recesses of his unused muscles. He was tired of having to undertake a simple adventure like a thief in the night. But in this other world, this other 2089, someone like himself would be a monarch of the black market, a suzerain of chaos, making his own rules, taking his own women. So what if the weaklings, those unfit to carry on the race, went to the wall? His kind wouldn't. He'd formed a pretty good idea of the kind of men who ruled that other world from the document in the sealed metal cylinder. The black marketeers had not even read it. Why, the fools had obviously been duped by the technicians into permitting the experiment. They had not grasped the idea that an alternate time track would mean their own non-existence. This other world had its troubles, but it was certainly a livelier place than where he'd come from. It deserved a chance. Yes, that was how he felt. His world was drowsily moribund. This alternate was starving, but managing to flail away at destiny. It deserved a chance. Albin decided that he was experiencing renunciation and felt proud. He materialized the time machine around the green instrument panel, disregarding the room full of military figures since he knew they could not see him. The single red switch pointed downward on the instrument panel. That was the gimmick that controlled the course of the missile. Now to make a halfway interesting world. Mac Albin pushed the little red switch from him. Flick. Now to make a halfway decent world. Mac Albin pulled the little red switch toward him. Flick. Now to make a halfway interesting world. Mac Albin pushed the little red switch from him. Flick. Pulled the little red switch toward him. Flick. Pushed the little red switch from him. Flick. Toward him. Flick. From him. Flick.
Okay, so Max Albin spends eternity switching from one possible world to another with a flick of a switch. I guess my question is, what does that do to the people that are living it? Are they aware or just stuck in an endless time loop? Nothing short of a paradox. Every experience is a paradox in that it means to be absolute, and yet is relative, in that it somehow always goes beyond itself, and yet never escapes itself. T.S. Eliot said that. Our story was written by William Tenn, but that's not his real name. Philip Klass was born in London on May 9th, 1920, and immigrated to the United States with his parents before his second birthday. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York. After serving in the United States Army as a combat engineer in Europe, he worked at a radio laboratory and was employed by Bell Labs. He began writing in 1945 and wrote academic articles, essays, 2 novels, and more than 60 short stories. In 1999, he was honored by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America as one of their best. How about that?
This is the Edsel. Its classic vertical grille, its elegant lines promise superb performance. And the Edsel keeps that promise on the road. These high compression, high torque engines are just one of many things that make driving an Edsel a great experience. To shift while both hands stay at the wheel. To feel the solid sureness of this beautifully engineered automobile. To sensibly test the potential of the newest engines in the world is something no man should miss. Your Edsel dealer invites you to take the Edsel for an introductory drive. This week, Road Test, the new member of the Ford family of fine cars, the Edsel, at your Edsel dealer.
That was episode number 643, and I hope that you enjoyed your travel through space and time. Please come back for more of Ron's Amazing Stories. You'll be glad you did. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button helps us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.